Nobody cut him in half.
They cut him in half, and something worse came back. That distinction matters more than anyone in this fandom has properly examined. Because the Darth Maul, who fell into that reactor shaft on Naboo, was a weapon. Precise, contained, lethal by design. What crawled out of the garbage heaps of Lotho Minor a decade later was something the Sith never anticipated, and something the Jedi were never prepared for, a being no longer operating inside any system of control, answering to no master, constrained by no code, and driven by a singular psychic wound, so deep it had reorganized his entire nervous system around it. Darth Maul, Shadow Lord, is not a story about survival. It is a story about what happens when a weapon survives its purpose. And it is one of the most quietly disturbing corners of Star Wars that the fandom consistently walks past. The official story, if you can call it that, because no one seems terribly invested in telling it, goes something like this. Darth Maul, presumed dead after his defeat on Naboo, somehow survived. Kept alive by sheer hatred, found by his brother, Savage Opress, restored physically and mentally through Night Sister magic and a confrontation with Mother Talzin, and then reintegrated, more or less, into the Clone Wars era as a recurring antagonist. He forms a criminal syndicate. He kills Pre Vizsla. He briefly holds Mandalore. Obi-Wan defeats him again. He escapes. He resurfaces on Malachor. He appears, finally, on Tatooine, where he dies genuinely, finally dies with what feels like relief in his eyes, whispering about the Chosen One, completing what he could not. It is a compelling arc. Maul is widely regarded as one of the most well-developed characters in the expanded Star Wars universe. His journey from Phantom Menace prop to fully realized tragic figure is discussed frequently and with genuine appreciation. What is discussed far less frequently is Shadow Lord, the 2019 novel by Ian McCaig and Greg Rucka, set in the immediate aftermath of Order 66, following Maul as he navigates the collapse of his Crimson Dawn Empire and the sudden, terrifying realization that the galaxy he thought he understood has changed irrevocably beneath his feet. This is where the fandom's attention tends to drift, and this is where the most interesting material lives.
Because Shadow Lord is not a story about Maul the warrior.
It is a story about Maul the survivor, and those are entirely different and almost incompatible identities. Understanding why requires going back further than the novel. It requires going back to what Maul actually was before any of this began. Here is the first crack in the standard framing, and it tends to be overlooked because it is so foundational, it becomes invisible. Darth Maul was not raised. He was manufactured. This sounds like hyperbole. It is not. Maul was taken from his mother, separated, delivered to Sidious before he had any framework for understanding what was being done to him or why. He was trained not in the sense of being educated, but in the sense of being shaped. Every instinct was redirected. Every impulse was cataloged and either weaponized or eliminated. He was given an identity that was entirely external, a name that wasn't his, a purpose that wasn't his, a master whose agenda he was never fully told. He did not choose to become Darth Maul. He was made into Darth Maul, and the distinction between the two is the fault line that runs through everything that follows, which means something important and unsettling. When the reactor shaft bisected him on Naboo, it did not destroy Darth Maul. It destroyed the only context in which Darth Maul made sense. And this is where it becomes disturbing. The Maul who survived, who crawled through the junk fields of Lotho Minor on a spider chassis of his own frenzied construction, was not operating from ideology. He was not operating from Sith philosophy. He was not following orders or fulfilling a purpose or advancing any agenda. He was operating from a wound, pure, unmediated, unstructured psychic pain, looping in on itself with no outlet and no framework for resolution. The Clone Wars series depicts this with remarkable restraint, Maul raving, half-mad, barely coherent, surrounded by filth. What it does not dwell on, and what the fandom tends to process as simply Maul was broken, is what that breakdown implies about the structure that preceded it. If Maul's sanity depended entirely on the structure Sidious provided on purpose, on hierarchy, on clear targets and clear rules, then his madness on Lotho Minor is not a deviation from who he was. It is a revelation of who he was, a being with no interior architecture of his own, because every brick of his interior had been laid by someone else.
That's not a warrior.
That's a dependent. And it means that every subsequent version of Maul, the Restored Maul, the Mandalore Maul, the Crimson Dawn Maul, the Shadow Lord Maul, is a person attempting to construct selfhood from scratch, in real time, under conditions of extreme duress, while simultaneously being hunted and while pretending to everyone around him, including sometimes himself, that he is simply executing a plan. Which means the question that runs under the entire Shadow Lord narrative is not, what will Maul do next? The question is, does Maul know who Maul is? And the answer that the novel circles without ever quite landing on directly is possibly not. And possibly that's been true for much longer than the fall into the reactor shaft. The second crack is timing, and it is sharper than it first appears. Order 66 catches Maul at precisely the worst possible moment, not militarily, not strategically, but psychologically. He has just rebuilt. Crimson Dawn is operational. He has lieutenants, resources, leverage, an empire of criminal networks that mirrors in small scale what he watched Sidious build in large scale. He is, for what may be the first time in his life, exercising genuine autonomous power, not power granted by a master, not power derived from position within someone else's hierarchy. His power built by his choices. And then, in a matter of days, it is gone. Palpatine reveals himself as Emperor. The Republic becomes the Empire. The Jedi are obliterated. The criminal underworld fractures and realigns almost overnight. And Maul, who has spent a decade and a half constructing an identity around being the one who operates outside every system, the one who answers to no one, discovers that he was never actually outside any system. He was operating in the spaces between Sidious's fingers, and Sidious has now closed his fist. If that detail matters, then the Crimson Dawn Empire wasn't independence. It was a cage Maul built himself without realizing it, bounded on every side by a galaxy that Palpatine controlled at a level Maul never fully understood. Which means someone needed Maul to believe he had freedom. And that's only possible if Palpatine was aware of what Maul was doing and chose not to stop it. The most disquieting question the novel raises, without ever quite stating outright, was Crimson Dawn Maul's? Or was it, in some sense, that Maul will spend the rest of his life being unable to fully face, always Sidious's? The third crack is simpler but goes deeper, and it involves what Maul actually does in Shadow Lord when everything collapses. He runs, not tactically, not strategically. He does not immediately begin constructing a new base of power. He does not mobilize assets. He does not attempt to consolidate what remains of Crimson Dawn. He runs with a handful of people through a landscape of ruins, trying to survive in the most immediate and unglamorous sense, which is to say, trying not to die before the next morning.
This is not the behavior of a mastermind.
It is not the behavior of the ominous figure who moved through the underworld like a ghost, always 3 steps ahead. It is the behavior of someone whose coping mechanisms have been overwhelmed, whose contingencies have failed, whose constructed identity has hit a wall it cannot think around. It is, if we're being clinical about it, the behavior of someone in crisis. And this is where Shadow Lord does something that almost nothing else in the Star Wars canon does. It forces Maul and the audience with him to sit inside that crisis without immediately resolving it. There is no plan that forms on page 15. There is no ally who arrives with a solution. There is no Force vision that clarifies the path forward. There is just Maul in the dark, with people who trust him for reasons he is not entirely sure he deserves, trying to figure out how to survive a galaxy that has just revealed itself to be something other than what he thought it was, which raises a darker possibility about every moment before this one. To understand what Shadow Lord is really doing, it is necessary to understand what Palpatine did to Maul, not the obvious thing, not the training and the deployment and the eventual disposal, but the subtler, longer-running operation that unfolded across Maul's entire existence. Palpatine gave Maul purpose. That sounds benign. It is not. Because purpose, when it is entirely externally sourced, does not build a person, it substitutes for one. Maul never had to develop the interior structures that would allow him to answer the question, "Who am I?" when I am not useful to someone. Because the question never arose. He was always useful. He was always deployed. He was always moving toward a target or away from one. The absence of interiority was not a bug in his development. It was the design requirement. A weapon that asks, why, is a broken weapon. Sidious needed Maul not to ask why. The implication, and it is worth sitting with this, is that everything Maul did in the decade after Naboo, all of it, the reconstruction of self, the formation of alliances, the building of Crimson Dawn, was not recovery from what Sidious did to him. It was the first time he had ever tried to be a person rather than an extension of someone else's will. And he did it with no model, no template, no understanding of what healthy selfhood looked like, because he had never observed it, never been allowed proximity to it. He had Savage, briefly, and lost him. He had his mother at a distance, and that relationship was too entangled with the Night Sister manipulation to serve as stable ground. He had Obi-Wan, his eternal nemesis, the man whose face was the organizing image of his hatred, and the Kenobi relationship is its own labyrinth of projection and substitution that the fandom has examined extensively but still hasn't fully mapped. What he did not have was anyone who could tell him, this is what it looks like to build something that belongs to you. This is what it feels like when power serves your values rather than the other way around. This is who you are when no one is asking you to be anything. Shadow Lord catches him at the moment when this absence becomes impossible to paper over. The novel's specific genius, understated, not always recognized, is that it surrounds Maul with people who need him to have answers he doesn't have. His Crimson Dawn lieutenants, those who survived, are not independent operators. They are people who have organized their lives around Maul's apparent certainty, and that certainty was always, to some degree, performance. Maul knew how to perform certainty. Sidious had modeled it perfectly. The question is whether, at any point, the performance and the reality had become the same thing.
The evidence in the novel suggests, not entirely,
not even mostly. There are moments quiet, easily missed, where Maul's internal framing does not match his external presentation, where he tells someone, "We will survive this," and the narration reveals he has no idea whether that's true, where he issues an order with complete authority, and the text lets us see that the authority is the only thing holding the decision together, that underneath it there is not confidence but the memory of what confidence looked like in someone else's face. This is the hidden motive of the Shadow Lord period, and it is not the motive usually ascribed to Maul: revenge, power, survival. Those are the surface motives, the ones that make narrative sense, the ones that can be discussed in plot terms. The deeper motive, the one that organizes everything underneath, is something closer to prove that you exist. Maul's fundamental project, from the moment Savage found him on Lotho Minor to the moment he dies on Tatooine, is demonstrating to himself first, to the galaxy second that there is a Maul underneath Darth Maul, that the identity Sidious constructed was not the whole story, that somewhere inside the weapon there is a person, and that person has worth independent of his usefulness to any master. The cruel irony that Shadow Lord inhabits, and that the fandom tends to flatten into simpler themes of trauma and resilience, is that Maul may never fully succeed at this project. Not because he lacks the capacity. The evidence of his Clone Wars arc suggests he has more interior complexity than almost any other character in the saga, but because the tools he uses to build selfhood are the same tools Sidious used to suppress it. He reaches for power because power is the only language he was taught. He reaches for dominance because dominance is the only relationship model he has. Every time he tries to construct something that is genuinely his, he finds himself building in shapes that Palpatine would recognize, because those are the only architectural forms available to him. And this is where it becomes genuinely dark, because it implies that even Crimson Dawn, even the thing that felt most like freedom, most like his, was already haunted, already structured according to someone else's blueprint, already replicating, at criminal scale, the master-apprentice dynamic that Sidious had installed in him so deeply that it had become invisible. He did not escape the Sith. He became the Sith autonomously, without a master, because he had been so thoroughly shaped by the Sith model that it was indistinguishable from his own choices. The most likely explanation for why this isn't discussed more often is that it is genuinely uncomfortable. It pushes against the redemption narrative the fandom wants for Maul, the narrative in which his arc is one of liberation, of self-determination, of a man reclaiming himself from a system that exploited him. That narrative is not wrong, but it is incomplete. And the incompleteness is where the real story lives. What happens next reframes everything. Because if Maul was always structurally replicating the dynamic he was trying to escape, then his death on Tatooine carries a meaning the fandom has partially intuited but never fully articulated. He does not die defeated. He dies finished. He dies in the presence of Obi-Wan, the one constant of his adult existence, the one relationship that was never about power or hierarchy or usefulness. And in his final moments he asks about Luke, about the boy hidden on Tatooine, and he is given an answer. He will avenge us. And Maul dies content. Content not because he has won, not because he has escaped anything, but because the project of proving that something exists underneath Darth Maul has, in the final second, been given a context. The Chosen One will complete what we could not, that places him inside a story larger than Sidious, larger than the Sith, larger than any of the structures that shaped him. He dies as part of something that Palpatine didn't design, and it's worth asking whether that was the closest he ever came to being free. What Shadow Lord costs Maul is not territory, or resources, or allies, though it costs him all of those things. What it costs him is the last architecture he had built to avoid answering the question that Lotho Minor forced into his consciousness, and that he has been outrunning ever since. Who is Maul when Maul has nothing? The consequences of that question sprawl in multiple directions, and none of them are comfortable to follow. The first consequence is about Crimson Dawn itself, what the organization becomes after Shadow Lord, what it becomes in the War of the Bounty Hunters and Crimson Reign comic runs, and what that trajectory implies about the empire Maul built. Qi'ra takes control. This is presented in those narratives as a transition, a passing of leadership, a natural evolution of the organization. What it actually is, and what the fandom has been somewhat reluctant to examine directly, is an erasure. Not a malicious one, not a coup exactly, but an erasure nonetheless. Qi'ra's Crimson Dawn is not Maul's Crimson Dawn. It is restructured around different values, different methods, a different philosophy of power. And this restructuring happens because Chira is, in a significant way, more capable of the thing Maul was reaching for than Maul himself was. She can build something genuinely her own because she was not as thoroughly shaped as he was. She had her own wounds, Han Solo, the pikes, the years of servitude, but she retained something Maul had lost so early he couldn't even name the loss, a private self that predated her conditioning. The consequence is that Maul's legacy is an organization that he built, and that then became most fully itself when he left it. This could read as tragedy. It might be better read as the inevitable result of what Sidious did not just to Maul, but to anyone who passed through the Sith system. The system does not create successors. It creates instruments. And when the instrument is no longer needed, the system moves on, indifferent, and what the instrument built is repurposed or dismantled according to whoever inherits it. The second consequence is older, and it reaches backward rather than forward. If Maul was always performing certainty, if the Shadow Lord persona was, as the novel implies, a construction held together by discipline and presentation rather than genuine self-knowledge, then every prior moment of Maul's apparent menace deserves a second reading. The Phantom Menace Maul, effortlessly deadly, saying almost nothing, projecting absolute purpose. What if that silence was not depth? What if it was emptiness? Not spiritual emptiness, not the disciplined void of a true Sith, but the emptiness of someone who has nothing to say because he has never been asked to have anything to say. The most likely explanation for why Maul is so often coded as cool, as iconic, as the best part of the prequel trilogy, is that the fandom processes his silence as mystery. We fill the silence with assumed interiority. We project onto the crimson and black, onto the double blade, onto the minimal dialogue, a richness of inner life that the film doesn't actually provide, and that the subsequent canon Clone Wars, Rebels, Shadow Lord, had to build from scratch precisely because the foundation wasn't there. Maul's prequel self is a surface, a magnificent surface, but a surface, and Shadow Lord is, among other things, a novel about what happens when that surface is stripped away and there is not yet anything behind it.
The third consequence is the one that is hardest to sit with, and it involves Obi-Wan.
Throughout their long antagonism from Naboo to Mandalore to Malachor to Tatooine, Maul treats Obi-Wan as the organizing figure of his hatred. Kenobi is the reason, the target, the wound that won't close. This is the standard reading, and it is not wrong. But Shadow Lord, taken in context with the rest of the arc, suggests a secondary function that the fandom has been slower to articulate. Obi-Wan is also, for Maul, the primary evidence that his existence mattered. Not because Maul values Kenobi's opinion of him, not because their relationship is warm or mutual or anything other than a decades-long series of mutually inflicted damage, but because Obi-Wan remembers. Obi-Wan was there on Naboo. Obi-Wan was there on Mandalore. Obi-Wan has witnessed Maul in a way that no one else has at his worst, at his most frenzied, at his most desperate. And Obi-Wan is still alive, which means the record of who Maul was is still alive, held in the memory of the one person who never stopped taking him seriously. The implication here is darker than it first appears. If Maul's hatred of Kenobi is also, at some level, dependency on Kenobi, if the enemy is also the witness, and the witness is necessary, and the loss of the witness would mean the loss of whatever continuity of self Maul has managed to construct, then their final encounter on Tatooine is not a confrontation between enemies. It is a confrontation between the last two people who share a particular history, and Maul's death, in Obi-Wan's arms, is not defeat, it is completion. It is being witnessed, finally, not as a weapon or a pawn or a tool of revenge, but simply as a person who lived and suffered and, at the very end, understood something. The cost of the Shadow Lord period, fully accounted, is everything except that. Maul loses his empire. His lieutenants scatter or die. His autonomy, such as it was, is revealed as dependent on a galaxy that Palpatine controlled at a depth Maul never fully mapped. His identity, the Shadow Lord persona, the constructed certainty, the performance of mastery, all of it fails to survive contact with the Empire's rise. He is left with nothing that can be named as property or power or position. What he retains is the question. The unanswered question that Lotho Minor planted and that the entire post-Naboo arc circled around. Is there a Maul underneath Darth Maul? The evidence of Shadow Lord is ambiguous. The evidence of the full arc is ambiguous. This is, perhaps, the most honest thing that can be said about it. He was not fully liberated. He was not fully enslaved. He was something in between, a person in process, a self under construction, working with damaged tools on a foundation that someone else had laid, and whether that construction ever achieved completion is a question the text leaves deliberately open. It would explain why his final line lands as hard as it does. He will avenge us. Us. Not me. Not the Sith. Not even the galaxy. Us, Maul and Obi-Wan, joined in the final moment by the only thing they ever genuinely shared: loss at the hands of Palpatine. And the hope, unverifiable, possibly delusional, possibly exactly right, that the boy on the moisture farm will close the loop that they could not. It almost feels like something wanted this. Like the alignment of Maul's death, Kenobi's vigil, Luke's proximity, like none of it was accidental, even if we can't say what the design was, or who, if anyone, intended it. That doesn't prove anything. But it's hard not to notice. Nobody cuts Maul in half and gets back a smaller version. What returns from that reactor shaft is larger in the ways that matter, more complex, more aware, more genuinely searching. And Shadow Lord is the novel that catches that larger thing. At the moment, it has finally run out of room to avoid itself. No master to serve, no empire fully intact. No enemy to organize the hatred around. Just Maul, in the ruins of everything he built, trying to figure out whether the person doing the building was ever real. The fandom talks about Maul's arc constantly. It talks about the tragedy, the resilience, the poetic death, the relationship with Obi-Wan. All of that is deserved. What it talks about less is the specific, uncomfortable implication that Shadow Lord surfaces and does not resolve. That the freedom Maul spent his entire post-Naboo life reaching for may have been structurally unavailable to him. Not because he lacked the will or the intelligence or the capacity for growth, but because the tools he had for building selfhood were the tools of the system he was built inside. And you cannot use a cage to construct an open field. Every time he reached for independence, he found himself replicating hierarchy. Every time he reached for power that was his own, he found himself building in shapes that Sidious would recognize. And the one moment that may have genuinely broken that pattern, the final moment on Tatooine, dying in the arms of his nemesis, placing his hope not in his own power but in someone else's destiny, is also the moment he was most fully himself. Which raises a question the fandom has not entirely answered, and which Shadow Lord, taken as the hinge it is, makes impossible to avoid. If the only moment Maul was truly free was the moment he had nothing left to hold on to, what does that say about everything he built to avoid reaching that moment? If you want more Star Wars truths that are rarely examined, you know where to find them. Subscribe if you've made it this far and leave a comment with this. Do you think Maul ever actually escaped Palpatine's shadow? Or was he always, in some way, still inside it,